Good afternoon and welcome to Wintergreen Studios virtual Land Art BioBlitz 2020. You are at Outdoor Survival Skills 101 with Walt Sepic, and we're just so happy to have you joining us on this call. My name is Jess Kilo. I'm the project coordinator at Wintergreen Studios, and I'll be your tech support on the call today. And Monica is your video host. Take it away.
Hi, Monica Capavilla here. I'm the program director at Wintergreen Studios and today's video host. So it's my amazing pleasure to welcome Walt Sepic. Walt is a retired physical education, industrial arts, and award-winning outdoor education teacher. He now runs his own business, Firefly Adventures, which encourages people from around the world to reconnect with nature. He helps people get outdoors and explore, whether it be by canoe or snowshoe, out enjoying the stars or learning survival skills, which he will teach us a little bit more about today. So Walt, over to you.
Thank you. Before we do our first video, I need to sort of set the stage, as it were. This video is useful if you already understand that you're going to have to spend the night outdoors. Your vehicle is broken down, you've lost it, you've gone for a long hike in the woods and got misplaced, so to speak. It's going to be dark soon, and you realize, I'm going to spend the night. Once you make that decision, this is where that video comes into play, okay? So just setting the stage for that. So this is a scenario where you really don't have any equipment with you. If you pack the backpack properly, you will certainly have more things that you can use, but let's assume you've got pretty well nothing. So, all right, we can cue the video.
Hi folks, Walt Sepic from Firefly Adventures. In this short video, we're going to look at building a debris shelter. So finding stuff in the forest to build a shelter after you realize that you're going to be spending the night in the wilderness. Okay? So one of the easiest methods is a lean-to. And you can do it a few ways. If you have cord or string, you can tie it between two trees and then use that tight string to lean other branches against to create a kind of a roof. Or if you have access to some sticks in the forest, for example this long branch, it would do nicely to be tied here. Now, tied, you say, if you have string, that's great, which I happen to have. If you don't, you can use your bootlaces or your shoelaces, or you can tear your clothing in strips while still keeping warm, and you can do it that way. So let's tie this branch to this tree, and the trees should be spaced apart about your body length. So something that's manageable. So that's just a regular overhand knot with the two loops, a shoelace knot, if you will. And the same thing here. Okay, there. So this is called a ridge pole now, and that's what you're going to lean the other material against. So we need to find some other material. Here's one. So we can do that. Find some more material. We can do that. Oh, here's some. That way. Yeah. All right, so our ridgepole is up and we've got these other ones lying down at right angles to it. And now we need to cover these. Some of them have a crotch in them, which is a perfect opportunity to support these cross pieces. This one has a crotch, but I'll turn it around and we put that in there. This one here. And basically you're finding more and more material to add as cross pieces. Pardon me while I wander around. Okay, we're getting there. Use that crotch in that one. Okay. Some more. All right, so we have our cross pieces on. On top of these now, you're going to cover it with whatever you can find that's going to block the wind. And that could be more smaller branches and then eventually dried leaves, or you'll break branches from other trees. Evergreens are probably the best, and the best of the evergreens is going to be cedar. Cedar, because the needles are flat and they're almost like shingles when you lay them down. Spruce is okay, pine's a bit better because the needles are longer, but you're going to lay them pointing down because the water will run off the needles that way. So we've got some prunings that we can use. Of course, in a survival situation, feel free to save yourself by cutting fresh green cedar boughs, pine boughs, spruce boughs, and make a good thick layer on top of everything. And that's going to stop the wind. Also, it'll help the water drain off in the direction the needles are pointing. Okay? And once you've covered that all up, you've got a modest shelter. Just to give you an idea. So here I am lying underneath the shelter. If the wind is blowing, it's important that you build the lean-to facing the wind. Okay, with the back. Have the roof facing the wind so the wind will slide up and protect you. If you're going to build a fire, the best idea would be to build a fire in front of the lean-to so that the ceiling, the roof, can reflect the heat to you, and it will help reduce the wind blowing your fire and making it difficult to start or manage. Okay. If you happen to have a pack with you, or your vehicle is broken down but there's a tarp in it, then you can cover the whole thing with the tarp.
And this will be more secure in the sense of shedding water and blocking the wind. You'll have to tie it in way down the back with rocks, that sort of thing. If you have garbage bags, you can cut them open and make large rectangles and fasten them like shingles, starting at the bottom and then on top. There's a number of ways to use the framework, and like I said, if you can't find a solid ridge pole, some string or cord or clothing torn in strips will make your ridge line as well. And there is a debris shelter. And I'll answer questions about this later as well. And thanks. It's a lot of fun just to go and do it. And if you use dead material or material that you were pruning anyway, then it's terrific, no harm done. And I've occasionally walked through the woods and seen the leftovers of shelters that children have made in the woods. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's also a useful skill. The availability of a tarp might seem unusual, but depending on what you brought in your backpack on your hike during which you got lost, you can utilize those items. A garbage bag is one of the most common items added to a survival kit, and I've made a list of those items on the information I made available to Jess, and that can be accessed later on.
We do have a couple questions that came in if you are
Sure.
ready to answer.
Absolutely.
Though I think this one was answered by the video. If there's a windstorm, to what extent can the structure withstand the elements?
Depending on the severity of the storm, the wind, the strength of the wind, I would select branches or poles that are sturdier. And I think if you match the material and the structure to the conditions, you should be fine. I would encourage people, if you're ever in a realistic situation for survival, please feel free please don't feel guilty about cutting live green growth. If you need to survive, the trees understand that, and they don't mind saving your life. So cutting as many green boughs, cedar preferably, make a nice thick roof, and it'll keep you out of the wind. The wind is the killer in these situations because it sucks your body heat away. And so to get out of the wind is the primary reason. Keeping dry is another one. Feeling secure, emotionally, mentally feeling secure is a real big benefit there as well.
Great. And then one more question here that came in from Timothy. Do you know Mors Kochanski's work? Does that name mean anything to you, Mors Kochanski?
I have heard the name before. I think once you spend time in the professional sort of outdoor leadership community, you tend to see names bounced around. And I have heard the name, but I'm not familiar with his work.
Timothy, can you expand upon that somehow?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention Morris Kochanski has a really great book that's called Bushcraft. And it's everything you would ever want to know about surviving the wild and you know, making shelters to building fires to whatever you can think of.
Another question here for you. How tall would you make your structure?
I think if there's lots of material, you still don't need to make it much taller than your waist. Sometimes time is of the essence. The bigger the structure, the more time required to make it. And if darkness is pending, the sooner you get it up and protecting you, the better. So normally I rough it out at waist height.
And one last question here. Would you put anything on the ground to sleep on to keep you warmer?
Excellent question. You would like not to lie on the wet ground, particularly if it's raining. So some of those evergreen boughs that you used for the roof, I would definitely put some underneath. And my first choice would be cedar because it's flat and soft and it won't scratch you. Next would be pine because the needles are longer and softer. My last choice would be spruce because it's very prickly. But yes, putting some layers underneath you to insulate you and lift you off the ground and keep you dry. Yeah, great idea.
Great question here. Specifically for you, Walt, have you been caught unexpectedly in the wilderness and actually built this kind of shelter? And do you have a story to share along with that?
I've got stories, but they're from other people. I have never been in the situation where I've needed to build a shelter for my own survival. I've built many shelters just for practice, but I have never been forced to make one. And you know, I guess that comes down to planning and what you take with you when you go on outings. But when I do my Frontenac Park demo there, I've got the whole day to do it. So I start off with several sad stories. And I use those unhappy incidences to sort of red flag or mark the decision points along the planning and the way and how they got to the dire situation. So looking at planning, what to bring with you, who to tell, essential components of a survival kit, those sorts of things are really helpful. But I'm lucky I've never been in that situation.
But I feel like if there were to be anybody that were in that situation, you'd probably be the most prepared for it.
Well, yeah, I would. I mean, you know, when you do it for practice, it's a lot of fun. And coming away from the experience the next morning, knowing that you can do it, it's just a nice feeling of confidence that when you're out in the bush, knowing you can do it, you know, it's a good feeling.
One last question here, and I'm not sure if you'll touch on this in the second video or not. What are some good suggestions for winter structures?
Oh, so yeah, winter camping, I'm crazy about it, just really excited. I've slept very often in the wintertime in a snow shelter. And it's called a quinzee. Quinzee. There's a few spellings, but that's the one that I use. Basically, you make a giant pile of snow, and then you put sticks inside it, like a porcupine, about 20 of them, to act as depth gauges. And they are about 30 centimeters long. And then you begin to hollow it out on the side away from the wind. And you keep hollowing until you bump into the tips of your depth gauges, which gives you a uniform thickness all the way around. And then you sleep inside your quinzee. And I've slept in the quinzees dozens of times. It's a great shelter. It's very quiet inside. There's absolutely no wind. The insulation actually allows the air temperature inside the snow shelter to rise from your own body heat. You can put a candle inside and the white reflects the light and it's very bright. It's very quiet too. So I would not recommend tunneling into an existing snowdrift because there are, well, because you did not make the snowdrift. You cannot guarantee that the density of the snow you've tunneled into will not allow it to collapse on top of you and suffocate you. There are some sad stories of people who did tunnel a sleeping area into a drift and it collapsed on them. And that's one of the stories that I use in my survival workshop. So you make your own and you know the density of it and you know the thickness of it. So if you make a quinzee and that 30 centimeters collapses on you, you simply sit up. And there's no problem other than you've lost your shelter, but you know, you're not going to suffocate with 30 centimeters of snow.
Yeah.
So yes, you certainly can make a shelter in the winter.
Great. That's all the questions we have for this video.
Okay, the next video is about building a fire. Not so much starting the fire, although that's part of it, but there are now so many ways to start a fire. Some of them are incredibly unique and strange, but they work. This is not what I'm about. Here I'm using a lighter. So having a lighter in your vehicle or in your pocket, in your winter jacket, leave it there in the breast pocket. So this is building a fire in the wilderness with just a lighter. Yeah, I can answer questions about fire starting afterwards. So yeah, let's cue the video.
Hello, I'm Walt Sepic of Firefly Adventures, and we're going to look at building a fire, which is a traditional outdoor skill. However, it's misunderstood sometimes. So you've probably all heard of the log cabin technique and or the teepee technique. The teepee where you build a tall, narrow structure. The log cabin technique where you use small sticks in sets of 4. The problem with both of those is that there is no fuel directly above the initial flame. And that's the problem why many times that fails. You may have had that experience. I prefer to use one called, I call it a lean-to, which requires one larger piece of fuel. And then I use that to lean the other ones on so that they are above the flame and the heat rises and causes them to catch flame, etc. So before you start your match or whatever device you've got, you should collect all your various sizes of fuel. And so this would be your final size, I would think, if it's a survival situation, unless you have a saw and you can cut larger dead wood. And before that, you're going to have some good thumb-sized pieces. And if they're difficult to break, you can lean them on a rock and throw a rock on them or stomp on them. My favorite is to go to 2 small trees close together, put it in and just wedge it and keep pulling and it'll break that way. And these are my smaller, dry, finger size and smaller. We can call that kindling. Sometimes dry bark is good as well. And then you need the really fine stuff that takes your flame, your initial flame. And that needs to be pretty small. So what I like to do is to use dry spruce branches. And these you get from underneath spruce trees. They'll often fall down, or the bottom branches are dead. And you can break them off and use them. In a survival situation, you may take green branches, but of course, you know, they won't work. So I've broken up that stuff into small dry material. So this is going to be my tinder. So there's tinder, then there's kindling, then there's small wood, medium and large wood. Have all those ready before you start your match. So I'm going to put some tinder down here. And what's going to take my match is birch bark. This is nature's lifesaver. And in a survival situation, feel free to take some from a live tree if you can't find a dead one. However, if you're hiking and you see a dead tree, take this home because you can use it without hurting a live tree. What I love about birch bark is that if it's been raining, it still works. Here's a pail of water. I'm going to dip this in the water and leave it there for a few seconds to show that even if it's raining out, it's still very useful and can still work. All right, we'll shake the water off it, and I'll take a small strip, and we'll light this out of the wind and show that even though it was in the water, it still has those natural combustible resins and oils that will allow it to help you start a fire. Okay? All right, so we'll put some birch bark underneath and around my tinder. And I've got more tinder right here to add. Many of you have heard that a fire needs three things: fuel, air, and some heat source to get the first flame going. But they need to be in balance. That's the hard part. Too much fuel, not enough air, it's smoky and it won't burn. Too much air, not enough fuel, it'll burn out quickly. And we've all had these experiences. So I'm going to try to mix up these different ones so that there's still air in there for the fire to work. My favorite starter is a lighter. Matches are great, but they need to be kept waterproof. Here's a waterproof match container. Okay. There's other fire starting techniques, and we may cover those if we have time. So I have my tinder set up. I'm going to light one of these. And remember, this is one that was in the water. Here we are. The resins cause the smoke. And putting your other pieces on top is very important so that the heat rises. I'm going to take some more of that and put it underneath. The heat will rise. Now we've got a fair flame going, and you will cover it with some more of the smaller material. And now this one's ready for the larger material. Notice how the lean-to helps prevent the wood from collapsing the fuel, which would block the air out. And that birch bark and that very dry, small, brittle branches from the spruce tree are doing a really good job. Okay? So, you keep adding thicker and thicker pieces until you've got a good sized fire to cook your meal, to keep you warm, keep animals at bay, so to speak. But psychologically, a fire is a really great thing to help you feel secure in a wilderness survival situation. Okay, we'll let that simmer, shall we say. Starting a fire, there are a number of ways. Lighter is my favorite because regardless of the conditions like rain and wet, it still lights if you keep it dry. These matches are probably the poorest type because if there's high humidity in the air, these will lose their dryness and they won't work. These ones are a bit better, but once again, must be kept dry. One of my favorites is this sparking tool. And you can make these sparks land in different things to start a fire. One of my favorites is dryer lint. Yes, I said dryer lint. There's a piece of dryer lint. And can you see the flame on the dryer lint? Okay, so that's one way to use dryer lint. Another way to use dryer lint is if you have hand sanitizer, put a tiny bit of that on, and it's got alcohol in it, and use the sparking rod we have a bit of a breeze today. There it is. Okay. And because the hand sanitizer has alcohol in it, the alcohol is very good. You can also use petroleum jelly with the dryer lint, and that's a petroleum product, so it's going to be just like a fuel, and it'll work as well. If you have some in your first aid kit, which hopefully you have, then that will work as well. There it is. Okay. So you don't need matches or a lighter. If you have one of these and you have access to some of those materials, you can get a fire. Nice and warm. Okay, I'll be available for questions later on. Thank you.
I feel like we could all just sit there and watch that fire. It's so calming.
It's interesting that the fire is kind of like has this primordial connection with our ancient selves, and fire being a gathering place, giving everybody a sense of comfort, security. Yeah, it's great psychologically speaking. Okay. In terms of those different fire starting techniques, I'm glad that I did the spark rod, and you can buy that at most hardware stores like Canadian Tire or Home Hardware, that sort of thing. Also MEC and Trailhead and all the outdoor stores will carry them. So, do we have any questions?
Oh, I'm told that you can also buy the sparking rod at Lee Valley.
Yes.
Perfect. Anything locally? Yep. What is your most preferred method without assistance of tools?
Well, I really love using the bow drill. And the bow drill is an ancient fire starting technique where you make a small bow out of a curved branch and a shoelace or some leather lace, and you wrap it around a spindle stick, and you have a small piece of hardwood on top, and you move the bow back and forth, which rotates the spindle vertically into a soft piece of dry wood. And you press hard and you create friction, which creates heat, and you make enough heat that the dark brown sawdust from the friction actually has an ember in it, a glowing red ember. And you take that red ember and you protect it like it was survival. You put it into a nest of dry material, which you can make and prepare ahead of time. Wood shavings, dry cedar shavings work really well. And you blow at the ember inside that nest until you create a flame. And because you're smart and you've got all your fire material ready, you take that flame from the nest you made and you put it and start the fire. So a friction starter. There's also a hand drill where you have a long stick and you rub it back and forth between your hands. It's the same sort of thing. You get the ember from the hot sawdust. So that's my favorite technique, bow drill.
And good on you. I have to say I've tried it once with a partner, and even with two of us, we could not get an ember to save our lives. So
yeah, there's a few stages to it. One is when you start seeing the smoke from the friction. And when you see the smoke, you get all excited.
Right, and that's just it. So we stopped.
Oh no, you don't stop.
That's when you have to keep going.
Exactly. And when you see the smoke, that's when you go faster and harder.
That's the opposite of what you think is happening. But
right,
yeah, exactly.
Right. But even getting smoke and smelling it, that's wonderful because you know you're on the right track.
Yeah. We have another question here. I think this is a personal question. Do you carry dryer lint with you in the wilderness or rely on finding birch bark?
If I have planned my outing, then I will bring my fire starting kit. And it's a small plastic container, waterproof. And in it, there's dryer lint and birch bark and the sparking rod and other things. If I get caught without that, I've always got my lighter and my fanny pack. And so either one.
Yeah, that was amazing to me, especially seeing that you used hand sanitizer to start a fire on your
We have a lot of that now.
precious hand sanitizer.
Yes, that's right.
But
Well,
the petroleum jelly, yeah,
yeah.
that really lit up. So we have time for about one more question here. And I see it. What kind of surface would you start a fire on? Dirt, grass? Do you clear a spot on the forest floor?
One important thing to consider is that if you're making a fire on the ground, that you may accidentally start a forest fire by heating up hidden roots just below the dirt surface. So if you have a choice, I would do it on flat, bare rock. If you don't, and you're doing it in the forest, if there's water nearby, I would obviously, when the fire's done, find a way to bring the water to there and pour it on the ground so that you can prevent that root fire. Another way to do it is to dig down with a stick, a pointed stick, which you pointed with your knife, of course. And you dig down and make sure that there are no roots right there, put the soil back, and then continue that way. Try to avoid making a fire on the forest litter, because that's going to make it more difficult to manage.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
What if you find yourself in a situation where there are no birch trees around? What other sources could you find? And you didn't happen to carry any dryer lint with you. What other sources could you find to start it?
Okay, if you still have a lighter or matches, some way to make flame, then find the finest and smallest diameter dry material. It need not be birch bark. Those very dry spruce branches that I used for tinder, if you make, get a bunch of them and twist them together and get your flame directly underneath them, they will often catch the flame and go from there. The smaller material, drier material will make good receptor for flame when you're starting. Birch bark is just a way to help guarantee that the flame will continue and will will advance quite well because of the resins in the bark. And also, if it's been raining, birch bark is that lifesaver. One of the hard things about fire starting in the wilderness is if it's been raining for several days, most of your available material is wet. I say most, not all.
Right.
It becomes a challenge then to find the dry material that takes your flame from your match and lets you start the fire. So that's when you look underneath trees.
Sure. What about pine needles?
That's a misconception. Pine needles or spruce needles, they will burn, but they don't keep the flame long. They combust very quickly and then it's gone. And there's only so many pine needles you can put to get the fire to a point where it's going to warm you. Once you start your fire, if it's been wet, you take your finger-sized wood and ring it around the fire you've made so that the ring of wet wood gets dry. So you place your damp wood around the outside of your fire to help it dry. And then you slowly roll those into the fire and add new damp wood. And you just keep rotating. So I call it nursing the fire. You've got to be there constantly attending to it, especially if it's been wet.
Sure. Unfortunately, we're all out of time for Q&As, but I wanted to thank Walt Sepic for taking up the time to provide us with that wonderful video and answer the age-old debate of teepee versus log cabin. Now I can tell everyone, no, the lean-to is the way to go. With that, Walt, I want to thank you very much and pass it back over to Jess.
Thank you, Walt, and thank you, Monica, and happy exploring.